Have you ever watched everything you've worked for slip through your fingers in the blink of an eye? It happened in a breath, the sound sharp, unforgiving, of glass shattering against marble, and in that suspended moment, Lena Hart could only stand there, frozen as pieces of the prototype. Wexler Innovations' crowning achievement splintered across the pristine floor like fragments of a life just beginning. She had only meant to help, one careless step, a cable not where it should have been. And just like that, she had destroyed the very thing that could have changed the future of clean energy, and possibly her own. Her voice came out in a whisper, trembling and barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wexler." At the door, Callum Wexler remained still as a statue. At 35, he had transformed a struggling lab into a global pioneer of sustainable technology. Known for his brilliance and his lack of mercy, his presence now filled the conference room with a silence heavier than any shout. He stepped forward. The sound of his designer shoes crunching over broken circuitry made Lena flinch. His voice was quiet, too quiet. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" She closed her eyes. In her mind, she was already packing her things. "Sir, please, let me explain. That prototype took 3 years to design." He cut in sharply. "And cost $80 million. Lena felt the color drain from her face. She had grown up counting every dollar, sharing textbooks, skipping meals, getting into engineering school had been her miracle landing. This internship had been beyond her wildest hopes. And now, because of one moment, one misstep, it was all gone. "I'll pay for it," she said, suddenly desperation cracking through her voice. Callum let out a humorless chuckle. "On an intern salary, you'd be repaying this until the end of the century." Around them, the room emptied. The other executives had slipped away, leaving her alone in the wreckage. With him, tears threatened to rise, but she willed them back. She wouldn't break. Not here, not in front of him. "There must be something I can do," she whispered. "Something to make this right." Callum studied her, not with anger anymore, but something colder, quieter, calculating. Her file had been impressive. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now? Here she was, shaken but not broken, standing in the ruins of his life's work, still looking for solutions. "Maybe," he said, slowly glancing at his watch. "Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. She wasn't sure what she expected when she arrived. Certainly not him, still in his suit, still composed, standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Manhattan skyline like a painting. "I don't care what the board says," he said into his phone. "Find a way to make it happen." He ended the call. Turned close the door, she did. Her pulse thudded in her ears. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit." She sat, and then wordlessly, he slid a folder across the polished desk. A single line of text stared back at her in bold official type. "Marriage contract." She blinked. "Excuse me," Callum's voice was matter-of-fact, emotionless. "My grandfather's will left me this company. But he added a condition: if I'm not married by my 36th birthday, it goes to my cousin, and that deadline is in exactly 3 weeks." Callum leaned back in his chair, voice cool and steady, like he was discussing a merger, not rewriting someone's life. "If I'm not married by the time I turn 36, control of Wexler Innovations defaults to my cousin Lucas. He'll run it into the ground within a year." Lena's brows furrowed, unsure what any of this had to do with her. "That sounds unfortunate," she managed. "It is," he replied. "Especially now that you owe me $80 million. Her breath caught. The number hung in the air, like a sentence, but he continued without missing a beat. "I'm offering you another form of repayment." Lena blinked. "I'm sorry." "What? Marry me for 1 year, be my wife in public, attend events, smile for the cameras. After 12 months, we part ways, quietly, discreetly. No one gets hurt, your debt disappears. And I'll even include a severance package. $1 million? Lena stared at him. Stunned, that's insane. His expression didn't waver. It's practical. This is a marriage we're talking about, not a tax write-off. It's a contract, he said, and right now it's your best option. Unless, of course, you have 80 million hidden under your mattress. He nudged the folder closer to her. If not, then legal proceedings begin, and your career ends before it even starts, her mind spun. There had to be another way, some other solution, but no matter how hard she searched for a loophole, there was none. And then her thoughts drifted to the one person who had always believed in her, her grandmother, the woman who raised her, who now needed expensive medical treatment Lena couldn't afford. $1 million could save her. Why me? She asked at last, her voice barely more than breath. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Callum's eyes. Respect, curiosity, maybe both. You're smart, you're composed, you've got nothing to lose, and nothing to use against me later. Lena looked at the contract again. Black ink, cold terms, one line for a signature. She had walked into that building expecting to be fired. Not proposed to. This wasn't just madness, it was a trap, and yet a strange part of her wasn't afraid. Not entirely. What exactly would this involve? She asked, cautious now. Sign and you'll find out. He slid a pen across the desk. Do we have a deal, Miss Hart? She took it slowly. Her fingers didn't shake. Not anymore. Sometimes the wildest choices were the ones that made the most sense. I must be out of my mind, she whispered, then signed her name. Callum's lips lifted into the faintest smile. Welcome to the family future, Mrs. Wexler. Neither of them knew that this so-called agreement was about to unravel everything they thought they understood about each other and about themselves. The next morning, Lena stood in front of the fogged mirror of her tiny apartment bathroom, staring at her reflection like she was a stranger. Had she really agreed to marry one of the most powerful men in New York? She splashed cold water on her face. You've completely lost it, she muttered to the mirror. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, car arriving in 30 minutes, pack essentials for 2 weeks, the rest will be moved. No good morning, no smiley face, just orders. Exactly what she should have expected from a man who viewed marriage like a merger. 28 minutes later, she was at the curb with a single suitcase. Her elderly neighbor peered through the blinds as a black limousine pulled up. Miss Hart, the driver asked with a respectful nod. Mr. Wexler regrets not being here himself. He's finalizing arrangements for this evening. This evening, she echoed, puzzled. The Wexler Foundation Gala, he explained, as she slid into the plush leather seats. Tonight's the official engagement announcement. Lena nearly choked. Tonight, we signed the papers yesterday. The driver offered a sympathetic smile in the rearview mirror. Mr. Wexler doesn't like to waste time. The city blurred past as the limousine whisked her away from the life she'd known, and into one she had never imagined. The farther the limousine traveled, the more the city transformed. Gone were the crowded streets and aging brownstones Lena had grown up with. The neighborhoods became quieter, cleaner, more polished. Storefronts gave way to boutiques. Old trees lined the sidewalks like guardians of another world. By the time they pulled up to the limestone building, Lena felt like she'd stepped out of her life and into someone else's dream. The driver stepped out and opened the door with practiced grace. Welcome to your new home, Miss Hart. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. Through glass walls that stretched from floor to ceiling, Lena saw the city laid out like a living map. Central Park to one side, steel and light to the other. Inside the space was impossibly refined, all neutral tones and elegant minimalism, as if chaos had never been allowed to exist here. Every painting, every chair, every quiet corner whispered of wealth that never had to announce itself. A woman in her 50s appeared, serene and polished. "Good afternoon, Miss Hart. I'm Mrs. Liang, the housekeeper. I'll show you to your suite." Lena followed her through the penthouse in a quiet daze. "Mr. Wexler occupies the east wing," Mrs. Liang explained. "Your rooms are in the west." The door opened to a suite larger than her entire apartment. There was a sitting room, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom that looked more like a spa than anything else. A deep marble tub gleamed under warm lighting, big enough to swim in almost. "This is unreal?" Lena whispered. Mrs. Leong smiled gently. "Mr. Wexler mentioned your arrangement is unique." Lena's head jerked up. "He told you, only that it's private." Mrs. Lang replied with a nod. "I've worked for him for 7 years. Discretion is part of the job." She checked her watch. "The stylist will arrive at noon. Mr. Wexler wants to ensure you're fully prepared." When the door finally closed behind her, Lena sat on the edge of the bed and stared up at the ceiling. What on earth had she just agreed to? By evening, the woman in the mirror didn't look like her anymore. The stylist had worked wonders. Her chestnut hair had been swept into elegant waves. Her makeup was soft, precise, enhancing without disguising. And the dress? A deep green silk that clung just right, making her eyes glow. It fit as though the gown had been made for her. There was a knock. She turned, startled. Callum stood in the doorway in a black tuxedo that somehow made him seem even taller, more composed. For a second, something flickered in his eyes, something almost like admiration. "You clean up well, Miss Hart," he said, his voice low, smooth. "You sound surprised," she replied, lifting her chin. He smiled faintly. "Consider me impressed." Then he held out a small black velvet box, a final touch. Inside was an emerald and diamond necklace that sparkled like it belonged in a museum. "I can't wear that." "You can," he said, already stepping behind her. "And you will. Tonight, every detail matters. People will be watching for cracks." She didn't argue, not when his fingers brushed her neck as he fastened the clasp, cold metal against warm skin. Their eyes met in the mirror. For a long second, neither of them looked away. "We need to align our story," he said, finally stepping back. "How we met, the proposal, the timeline." "I assumed you had a script prepared," she said, sharper than she meant to. "The best lies," he said calmly, "are the ones built around truth." He crossed the room and poured a glass of water, then continued as if rehearsing lines. "We met at Wexler Innovations. There was chemistry from the start, but office romance is frowned upon. So we kept it quiet, secret dates, late-night conversations, and then a private dinner on my yacht. Down on one knee, family heirloom ring." Lena arched a brow. "Do you even own a yacht?" "I own 3, he replied, glancing at his watch. "Shall we?" Callum glanced at his watch, then back at her, with that unreadable calm. "It's time. And remember tonight, you're hopelessly in love with me." Lena raised a brow, voice dry. "I'll try not to look too thrilled." In the elevator, silence settled over them, like a velvet curtain, and then unexpectedly he reached for her hand. His grip was firm, not possessive, but grounded, steady, warm. "One more thing," he said, his voice a low murmur as the elevator hummed downward. "People will expect affection." Before she could ask what that meant, the doors slid open with a soft chime, and they were blinded by flashing lights. A crowd of photographers waited just beyond the lobby. Without hesitation, Callum's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close. Too close for comfort, not quite close enough to feel real. "Smile," he whispered, near her ear. "You've just agreed to marry the man of your dreams." The ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowed like rivers, conversations rose and fell in elegant swells. Lena had never seen so much wealth in one room, so many diamonds, so many expectations. She barely had time to absorb it all when a striking woman in her 40s approached. She kissed both of Callum's cheeks, a polished performance for the crowd. "So the rumors are true," the woman said, eyes turning to Lena with clinical curiosity, and this must be the lucky girl. Cassandra? This is Lena Hart, my fiancée, Callum said, with practiced ease. Lena Hart? Cassandra echoed, smiling, without warmth, no relation to anyone. We'd recognize? I assume? Lena smiled back, just as cool, none whatsoever. How refreshing, Cassandra drawled. It's nice to see Callum, with someone so young. Callum's arm tightened ever so slightly around Lena's waist. Youth brings a fresh perspective, something this company has needed for a long time. They drifted from conversation to conversation, faces handshakes, forced laughter, names Lena would forget the moment they walked away. Everyone, it seemed, was fascinated by the mysterious woman who had stolen the city's most elusive bachelor. They're all trying to figure out what you see in me, Lena murmured as they danced. Let them wonder, Callum replied, guiding her smoothly across the polished floor. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back. Mystery is part of your appeal. She tilted her head. So that's why you chose me, because no one knows who I am. His expression shifted, just a flicker, but it was real. No, he said. I chose you because when you stood over $80 million in broken glass, you didn't panic. You looked for a solution. Before she could respond, a voice broke into their quiet moment. So this is the woman who's finally captured. My nephew's heart, said a man with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. He looked like Callum. Might in 20 years, same height, same sharp suit, but softened by age and a kind warmth Callum often lacked. I'm Harold Wexler, he said to Lena, offering his hand, the more charming uncle. I'm told, Lena smiled, charmed despite herself. A pleasure, Mr. Wexler. Call me Harold, he insisted. Then to Callum, your grandfather would have approved my boy. She's got fire in her. As he moved on, Lena leaned in. He actually believes we're in love. Callum's gaze followed his uncle across the room. Harold sees the best in everyone, even me. His tone shifted, sharpened, as his eyes landed on another man across the ballroom. There, that's Lucas, my cousin. The reason we're here, Lena followed his gaze. Lucas Wexler, all smooth charm and too perfect posture, his smile didn't reach his eyes, and when he saw them together, that smile disappeared entirely. He doesn't look thrilled, she observed. No, because every second we look like the perfect couple. Is another second, his plan falls apart. Something darker flickered in Callum's expression. Determination, yes, but something more. Shall we give him something to really worry about? Before she could ask what he meant, his hand cupped her cheek gently, and he leaned in. The kiss was not for the cameras. It was deliberate, quiet, measured, but real enough to leave Lena breathless. And when he pulled back, there was a question in his eyes, a silent, unreadable question she couldn't name. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Was that part of the contract? He didn't answer, and somehow that said everything. Consider it a necessary amendment, Callum murmured near her ear, his voice rougher now, almost vulnerable. All around them, camera flashes went off like firecrackers, capturing a kiss that was never meant to be real, but had somehow left Lena more breathless than any spotlight ever could. Neither of them noticed Lucas Wexler slip away through a side door, a phone already pressed to his ear, a calculating smile curling at his lips. Sunlight poured gently through the tall windows of Lena's new bedroom, casting soft gold across the crisp white sheets. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The elegance of the room, the clean lines, the muted colors, the silence felt like waking up in someone else's life. And then she remembered the gala, the whispers, the kiss. She reached for her phone, and it lit up with notifications, dozens of them. Wexler, off the market, whirlwind, engagements, stuns. Industry mystery, Woman tames. Billionaire CEO Lena groaned, burying her face into the pillow. What had been a quiet, calculated arrangement was now a headline sensation. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Maya. Maya, you're engaged to your boss. When were you going to tell me? Call me now. Before Lena could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Leong entered. With a breakfast tray and a calm smile, Mr. Wexler asked me to bring you these, she said, setting the tray beside a stack of newspapers. He's already at the office, but he'd like you to join him for lunch at 1. The car will be ready at noon. Thank you, Lena said softly. When she was alone again, she picked up one of the papers. Most of the coverage was flattering, overly so, but not all. One column pointed out the perfect timing of their engagement just weeks before Callum's birthday. Another listed her background in a tone that felt more like an interrogation than a bio. Her phone rang. Livy, her grandmother's voice, came through gentle and unsure. Is it true? Are you really engaged to Callum Wexler? Lena closed her eyes, her chest tight with guilt. It's complicated, Gran. Life always is, sweetheart, her grandmother replied kindly. But he seems like a successful young man. He is, Lena said, her voice catching. He's, complicated too? Well, her grandmother said with a sigh. I want to meet him. This weekend, if he's serious enough to ask for your hand, he can sit at my table. Lena promised she'd try. Then, hung up and leaned back against the headboard. She hadn't thought about what would happen when her real life, the life that included people who loved her, came face to face with this fabricated one. Somehow she doubted Meet the Family had been in the contract. Wexler Innovations towered above the city like it ruled it. When Lena walked through the glass doors, the change was immediate. Just yesterday, she had been a faceless intern. Now people looked at her with curiosity, respect, suspicion. She was no longer invisible. She was visible in a way that made her skin itch. She was escorted straight to the executive floor, where a sharply dressed woman greeted her with a hint of something new in her voice. Miss Hart? The assistant said smoothly. Mr. Wexler is finishing a call. You may wait in his office. Lena stepped inside. It was exactly what she expected. Sleek, minimal, and powerful. But one thing stood out. A single photo on the windowsill. An older couple, smiling in a quiet, natural way. His parents, she guessed. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Just getting to know my fiancé better. She turned. Callum was leaning in the doorway. Jacket, gone sleeves rolled to the forearms, looking less like a CEO and more like a man who'd been at work since sunrise. She nodded toward the photo. Your parents, something flickered in his expression, a softness she hadn't seen before. Yes, they died when I was 22. I'm sorry, she said gently, and she meant it. He looked at her for a long moment before stepping inside, and for once, he didn't look like someone trying to control a boardroom. He just looked like a man holding on to something that still hurt. The sincerity in Lena's voice seemed to catch them both off guard. Callum blinked, then nodded once. Stepping behind his desk, the press coverage was more intense than expected, he said, flipping through a stack of articles. We need to talk about next steps. Next steps, she echoed, taking a seat across from him. The board has invited us to dinner tomorrow. They're eager to meet the woman who apparently managed to reform Wexler's most famously unattached CEO. Lena let out a breath, unsure whether to laugh or run. My grandmother called this morning, she said after a pause. She wants to meet you, too. Callum looked up, eyebrows drawing together. That wasn't on our schedule. She doesn't check your schedule before caring about my life, Lena said flatly. She raised me after my parents died. She matters to me. Something in her tone made him pause. Then with a small nod, all right, we'll go this weekend. He checked his watch. I've arranged for lunch to be sent up. Before that, we need to go over your new position. My position? She asked, surprised. I thought I was just the prop. fiancé. That would be a waste, Callum said simply. You're an engineer with top-tier credentials, starting Monday. You'll be working with our R&D division. Lena blinked. Why would you? Because it's what you would have been doing if this arrangement hadn't happened, and because it makes our relationship more believable. I'm not just investing in your image. Lena, I'm investing in your mind. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Thank you, she said quietly. He slid a folder across the desk toward her. Your actual employment contract, salary, and benefits are in line with your qualifications. The marriage contract remains separate. Before she could say more, a knock came at the door. Rebecca, his ever-efficient assistant, wheeled in a cart, draped in linen, and filled with gleaming silver domes. Lunch, she announced crisply, from Chanterelle. Lena raised an eyebrow as Rebecca left. Is this how you usually eat lunch? Callum gave a rare smile, normally at my desk, in front of a spreadsheet. This is a step up. He loosened his tie as he sat, an oddly intimate gesture that made him look almost human. Over risotto and roasted vegetables, Callum walked her through names, departments, key board members. But it wasn't just data. It was passion. Every name had a story, every project a purpose. The layers of the company were built on generations of care. You really love this place, Lena said softly. Surprised at her own observation, Callum didn't hesitate. It's more than a company. My grandfather started it with nothing. My parents grew it into something global. When they died, keeping their legacy alive became mine. Is that why you're fighting so hard to keep it out of Lucas's hands? His expression hardened. Lucas would sell it off piece by piece, strip it down for profit. I won't let that happen, the intercom crackled. Mr. Wexler, Rebecca's voice came through. Lucas is here to see you. Says, it's urgent. Callum's jaw tightened. Send him in. A moment later, Lucas strolled in with the confidence of someone who thought the world belonged to him. Cousin, he drawled, and the radiant bride-to-be. How? Domestic, Lucas, Callum said coolly. What do you want? Oh, nothing, Lucas replied, taking Lena's hand before she could pull away. Just thought. I congratulate you, in person. Quite the surprise. I must say, his tone made Lena's skin prickle. Thank you, she said cautiously. I mean really, Lucas went on. A recent engineering grad from a public university, landing the most eligible man in New York in under a month. You must be incredibly persuasive. Callum stood and stepped beside Lena. The air in the room changed. I believe that's between Lena and me, he said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. Lucas raised both hands in mock surrender. Of course, just making conversation. But his smile, that smile was the kind that said this wasn't over. And Lena had the feeling the real test of this arrangement was just beginning. Lucas lingered at the door, turning back just as he was about to leave. Oh, and I've taken the liberty of inviting myself to the board dinner tomorrow, he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hope that's all right. I'm simply dying to hear more about your whirlwind romance. As the door clicked shut behind him, Lena let out a slow, shaky breath. He knows, she murmured. Something's not adding up for him. Lucas always suspects something, Callum replied, his voice steady, but there was a shadow of concern in his expression. We'll need to be flawless tomorrow. The following evening, they sat side by side at a private table in Leota, an exclusive restaurant reserved for power dinners and quiet negotiations. Around them sat the Wexler Industries Board of Directors, 8 people who collectively held the fate of the company in their hands. Lena wore a tailored midnight blue dress, chosen by the stylist, understated but elegant. It gave her an air of quiet sophistication. She could feel every eye in the room on her. So, said Eleanor. Blackwell, the eldest board member, her voice warm but curious. How did the two of you meet? Callum slipped seamlessly into their rehearsed story, his hand resting lightly on Lena's. I noticed her right away, he said, with a small smile. But company policy made things complicated. She spilled coffee on him, Lena added, improvising on the fly, completely ruined his suit. He was surprisingly gracious. That doesn't sound like... Callum chuckled. James Harrington, another board member, he once made an executive cry over a typo. What can I say? Callum replied smoothly, his gaze meeting Lena's with unexpected warmth. She brings out my better side. The evening unfolded easily after that. Glasses clinked, polite laughter flowed, and the couple, pretend though they were, seemed to hold the room in a delicate balance. Until Lucas arrived, fashionably late, of course, and immediately, unmistakably dominant. He greeted the board with effortless charm, then turned his full attention to Lena. The questions came quickly. Where was she from? Where did she study? Did she come from a family in the industry? Each inquiry felt harmless on the surface, but Lena knew he was probing, looking for cracks, and where exactly did Callum propose, he asked. As dessert arrived on his yacht, Lena replied. Not missing a beat, Lucas arched a brow. Which one, the Mediterranean cruiser or the one in the Caribbean? Lena froze. Callum hadn't told her, but before the silence could deepen, Callum stepped in, effortlessly. Just off Santorini, he said. The sunset was unforgettable. Lucas's smile faltered ever so slightly. How romantic. And the ring, he pressed. A family heirloom. Wasn't it? Lena tensed. She wasn't wearing one. The only piece of jewelry she had was the emerald necklace from the gala. Before the moment could unravel, Eleanor Blackwell's voice cut through the tension. All right, Lucas. That's enough. You're making the poor girl squirm. She turned to Lena with a kind smile. My dear, I've known Callum since he was a boy. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, Lena blushed. Not all of it was an act. Had he been looking at her differently, she hadn't noticed. Or maybe she hadn't allowed herself to notice. After dinner, as they waited for the car, Callum slipped an arm around her waist. You were incredible tonight, he murmured. Except for the missing ring, already solved, she guessed. He nodded. 30 minutes later, they stood in a private showroom at Tiffany & Co. The manager had unlocked the doors. Just for them, Lena watched in disbelief as Callum scanned the display cases with focused ease, finally choosing a diamond ring that shimmered like starlight. Isn't this a little much? She asked softly as the manager stepped away. Nothing about a Wexler engagement can be understated, he replied. Besides, it's an investment. You'll get it back when the arrangement ends, she said. But something about those words stung more than she expected. Callum noticed. I didn't mean it like that. It's fine, she said quickly. This is business, I know that. He gently took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Their eyes met. For a moment, everything around them fell away. The sparkle of the room, the expectations, the lies. Just two people standing still in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. And in that stillness, something shifted. As Callum slid the ring onto her finger, his hand lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary. The touch was light, intentional, not forced, but still it sent an unwelcome flutter through Lena's chest. And then his voice, lower than before, more honest than she expected. For what it's worth, if this were real, I couldn't have chosen better. She didn't know how to respond. Didn't even have the chance. His phone rang. Immediately, his expression shifted, sharp edges returning. Yes, a pause when another pause. This one heavier. I'll be there right away. What happened? Lena asked as he ended the call. Callum turned to her, his face grim. There's been a break-in. The new prototype, the one meant to replace the device. The one that was lost. It's gone. The way he said it. He didn't accuse her, not outright, but the suspicion hung in the air like smoke. Lena sat in silence beside him during the drive, her eyes on the ring glittering on her finger, just when she had begun to think of Callum as something more than a ruthless businessman. She was reminded of the truth in his world. Trust was rare, like diamonds, beautiful, valuable, and ultimately just another asset to be guarded. Wexler Industries was a flurry of tension and movement when they arrived. Security staff, police, and executives clustered around screens showing grainy footage. Mr. Wexler said, "The head of security, we've got surveillance of the breach." On screen, a masked figure moved through the corridors with practiced precision, disabling cameras in sequence. Whoever this was, they weren't guessing. This was an inside job, Callum said tightly. They knew exactly where to go. "Pull the access logs," he ordered. Last 30 days, while Callum turned to speak with police, Lena stepped closer to the monitors, watching intently. Her mind, trained in engineering, problem-solving, began to map the movements of the intruder, and then she saw it, a hesitation. "Wait," she said to the technician. "Can you bring up the building schematics?" He gave her a confused look, but complied. She traced the path on the diagram. They knew the security systems, but not the building layout. "See this junction? Left would have been the direct route, but they went right. That's the long way around." Callum appeared beside her, following her finger. "What are you saying I'm saying?" "Whoever did this had access to your protocols," she replied. "But they don't work here regularly. They studied the systems, not the structure." His jaw clenched. "Get the visitor logs. I want a list of everyone who's requested access to our security systems in the last 3 months. An hour later, they had it. 3 weeks ago, Lucas had brought in a consultant to evaluate the building's security. That consultant had been given temporary access to every protocol. "It doesn't prove he was involved," Lena said cautiously as they left the building. "Nearly midnight now. It's him," Callum said, with quiet certainty. "That's how he works, from the shadows, clean hands, dirty work." In the car, exhaustion settled over Lena like a weighted blanket. The stress, the gala, the kiss, and now the break-in. It all caught up at once. Without thinking, she leaned her head against Callum's shoulder. He stiffened, just for a second, and then he relaxed, letting her stay there. "I'm sorry," he said softly, after a while. For what she murmured, nearly asleep. For thinking even for a second that you might have had something to do with this. She should have been angry, but the fact that he'd admitted it at all surprised her more. Callum Wexler, apologizing, she said with a quiet smile, must have taken effort. A low laugh rumbled in his chest beneath her cheek. "You have no idea." The quiet vibration of Callum's laughter rumbled through his chest where Lena's head still rested lightly. "I've been told emotional vulnerability and small talk aren't exactly my strengths," he admitted. This time his laugh was deeper, less guarded. "You're very direct, Miss Hart." "Lena," she corrected, lifting her head to meet his gaze. "If we're going to be married, even temporarily, you should use my name." His eyes held hers. For a moment, something flickering there. She couldn't quite read. "Lena," he repeated softly, like tasting the shape of it on his lips for the first time. The air between them shifted slow, fragile, charged with something unspoken, something neither of them was ready to name. Then just as quickly, he looked away. "You should get some rest," he said. "We're visiting your grandmother tomorrow." The next day, the sleek black car pulled into a quiet neighborhood in New Jersey. Lena fidgeted with her hands as they neared the small, well-kept home that had raised her. "Just remember," she said, glancing at him, "my grandmother thinks this is real. She raised me after my parents died. She's all the family I have." Callum's face softened, his voice low. "I understand family loyalty." He reached over and took her hand, brushing his thumb gently over the engagement ring he'd placed there. "I'll be on my best behavior." The front door opened before they could even knock. At 72, Rose Hart was still sharp-eyed and brisk, her silver hair swept back in a bun, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as she pulled her granddaughter into a tight hug. "So this is the young man who swept my Livy off her feet," she said, eyeing Callum. As if she were scanning his soul, he took it in stride. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Hart," he said, offering her his hand. "Your granddaughter is extraordinary. I'm the lucky one." Rose's eyes softened. but her voice was still wry. Well, at least you recognize that much. Come in tea's already steeping. They sat together in the warm, tidy living room, the scent of cinnamon cookies floating from the kitchen. Over tea and laughter, Callum spoke with ease, telling their story with just enough truth to keep it believable, just enough fiction to keep the arrangement intact. But what stunned Lena were the details he added. How he'd noticed her solving a complex equation on a whiteboard during her first interview, how she brought coffee to the maintenance staff every morning, how she hummed softly always when she was focused. Lena blinked. She had never told him those things. She'd never worked with him directly before the accident. How had he noticed Rose? Of course, missed nothing. You don't mind the age difference? She asked, Callum blunt as ever. You must be, what, 10 years older? 8, he answered smoothly. And no, I find Lena's perspective refreshing. She sees opportunities where others see obstacles. Later, as Lena helped her grandmother slice fruit for lunch, Rose nodded toward the kitchen window, where Callum stood in the garden listening intently as she showed him her prize rose bushes. He watches you when you're not looking, Rose said gently. Lena busied herself with the salad. What do you mean? Not like a man admiring something he owns, more like someone who's found something precious and can't quite believe it's his. Lena paused, knife hovering over a strawberry. Rose turned her tone soft. Is it real, Livy? She had never been able to lie to her grandmother. It's complicated. Love usually is, Rose replied with a knowing smile, but don't confuse gratitude for love. You deserve someone who sees your worth for who you are, not just what you've done. On the drive back to the city, Lena stared out the window, still turning her grandmother's words over in her mind. She's a remarkable woman, Callum said beside her. Strong, honest. Sharp now, I see. Where you get it? Lena smiled, quiet. She liked you. That's a miracle, Callum teased lightly. She strikes me as the type who's suspicious of anyone in a suit, more expensive than her car. She just wants me to be with someone who's real, Lena replied softly. Someone who truly values me. Callum didn't respond, but in the silence that followed, she felt his hand brush gently against hers, and she didn't move away. She asked about your parents, Lena said quietly. Callum hesitated, then answered almost in a whisper. I told her. They would have been proud of the woman you've become. I hope that was appropriate. Lena turned to look out the window of the car. The simplicity of his words, how easily he'd said them, cut through her more deeply than she expected. Yes, she said softly. It was the week that followed, passed in a blur. There were events, galas appearances that felt more like theater than reality, but behind closed doors, at quiet dinners, in the penthouse, or in the spaces between conversations, something began to shift. Lena found herself laughing more around Callum, discovering bits and pieces of the man beneath the controlled exterior, his dry wit, his surprising love of classic architecture, his soft spot for old black and white films. And in return, Callum seemed to relax around her. His smiles came easier, his silences less guarded. He even shared a story once about how he used to sneak into his father's workshop as a boy, just to take apart old radios and try to build them again. The lines between their arrangement and something real began to blur meanwhile. The investigation into the prototype theft continued. And though all signs pointed to Lucas, nothing was concrete enough to act on. Callum grew tenser. With each passing day, he worked late into the night, often falling asleep in his study with papers still in his hands. 3 days before the wedding, Lena returned to the penthouse to find him exactly there, surrounded by documents, eyes weary. You missed dinner, she said gently. He looked up, rubbing his forehead. I'm sorry I lost track of time. She stepped closer. What's all this? Preparation, he said. There's a board meeting tomorrow. Lucas has requested a vote of no confidence. She froze. Can he do that? If he gains enough support, yes, Callum's voice was low but grim. He's claiming that this engagement, our sudden marriage, proves I'm unstable. Unfit to lead, Lena sat down across from him. What can I do? He blinked, surprised by her offer. You've already done more than the contract ever asked of you. We're partners in this, aren't we? She said, reaching for his hand. That gesture had become second nature by now, but this time it meant something more. Let me help. Callum looked down at their joined hands. Something softened in his expression. Why, he asked quietly. Why help me beyond what we agreed to? I've been cold, demanding. I even suspected you. Lena thought for a long moment, then said carefully, because I have seen who you are beneath all that. Someone who still cares about what his parents built, who treats my grandmother like she matters. Who notices that I hum when I'm thinking, she added, with a small smile. Even if you are still terrible. At apologies, Callum exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders eased. The board expects both of us tomorrow. I'll be there. The next morning, the boardroom fell into silence as they entered hand in hand. Lucas sat at the far end of the long table, confidence radiating off him like cologne. A smile sharp and rehearsed played on his lips. Mr. Wexler, Ms. Hart, thank you for joining us, began Eleanor Blackwell, the most senior member of the board. As you all know, she continued, Mr. Lucas, Wexler has called for a vote regarding the leadership of Wexler Industries. Lucas stood with practiced elegance. My cousin's recent decisions speak for themselves, he said. A rushed engagement to a woman with no corporate background, no family ties, and no relevant experience, clearly orchestrated to fulfill a clause in our grandfather's will. This is not the leadership we were promised. Whispers rippled around the room. Lucas smiled as if victory was already in his pocket. Then it was Callum's turn. He stood, voice calm, steady. My cousin makes a compelling argument, but he forgets why that clause exists in the first place. He walked to the far wall, where portraits of past Wexler leaders hung men and women who had built, expanded, and protected the company's legacy. Our grandfather believed Wexler Industries should be led, not just by intellect, but by partnership, by trust qualities. He feared I'd lost after my parents died. He turned back to the room and to Lena, meeting. Lena reminded me what those qualities look like and why they matter. He was right, Callum said, voice low as he looked toward the portraits of his parents. After they died, I buried myself in work, numbers, systems, efficiency, because they don't leave. They don't break your heart. He turned, walked back to Lena's side. His gaze didn't leave her, but then I met Lena. And suddenly, the world wasn't just data again. She challenged me. She reminded me that innovation is human, that leadership is about people, not just profit. He reached for her hand. I didn't pursue this relationship to satisfy some clause in a will, he said, the sincerity in his voice catching even her off guard. I pursued it because for the first time since I lost everything, I found someone I was willing to risk everything for. The room was still. Lena blinked. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't part of their strategy. And yet, it was the most real thing she'd ever heard him say. Lucas let out a slow, deliberate scoff. A touching story. Cousin, truly. But where's the proof of this grand romance? A convenient engagement, mere weeks before your deadline. He leaned back smugly. Lena stood. It wasn't planned, but it felt right, if I may, she said. Her voice was calm, clear, every eye in the room turned toward her. I understand your concerns. An intern and a CEO, engaged after a few weeks. It sounds like fiction. She paused, then looked around the room. The truth is, I destroyed an $80 million prototype in my third week here. Gasps echoed through the boardroom. Lucas sat straighter, like a predator, Sensing weakness, I expected to be fired, Lena continued. But Callum didn't discard me. He gave me a second chance, not because it was convenient, but because he saw value in me, even when I didn't. She turned to him, and over time that respect grew into something more. He saw past the mistake, past the optics. He believed in who I was and who I could become. That's what makes him the kind of leader this company needs, someone who sees potential where others see problems. Eleanor Blackwell studied her with quiet intensity, and you truly believe he's the right person to lead Wexler Industries. With absolute certainty, Lena replied without hesitation. He honors the past while building something better for the future. Isn't that the legacy this company was built on? Lucas's voice cut in smug and sharp. How inspiring. But I have something that might change your minds. He slid a folder to the center of the table. Phone records, he announced, showing that Miss Hart made a call to the very consultant who breached our systems and stole the prototype. The room stiffened. She was working with me all along. Lucas added his tone, triumphant. Callum stiffened beside her. That's a lie, he said immediately. Is it? Lucas challenged. Check the records. See for yourself. Callum opened the folder. Silence. The board watched, breath held as he flipped through the papers, his expression unreadable. Then he closed it. Calm, cold. It's an impressive forgery, Callum said finally. But there's one problem. He looked directly at Lucas. These call records show calls made while Lena was with me, including during our meeting with Eleanor last Tuesday. Lucas's confident smile wavered. Perhaps. Your memory is faulty, he offered. A new voice cut through the tension. Or perhaps, came the steady voice from the doorway. The real problem is that you thought no one would check. Everyone turned, standing there, was Harold Wexler Callum's uncle, accompanied by a man in a dark suit. Lucas's face paled. This is a closed meeting, he said tightly. Indeed, Harold replied pleasantly, and as a major shareholder, I have every right to attend. He gestured to the man beside him. This is Michael Chen from Corporate Security. At my request, he's been looking into certain irregularities. Mr. Chen stepped forward calm and authoritative. We've traced the breach and the theft directly to Lucas Wexler, he said. He hired a man named James Mercer to access the systems and steal the prototype. He pulled a document from his briefcase. The prototype is currently stored in a facility registered to one of Lucas's shell companies. Chaos erupted. Lucas jumped to his feet, voice rising in protest, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. And for the first time since Lena had stepped into this world, the truth was on their side. After a brief recess, the board reconvened, this time with clarity. Lucas's motion was dismissed, without debate. In its place, a new vote passed swiftly and unanimously. He would be removed from the company, and charges would be filed. As the room slowly emptied, Harold Wexler approached Callum and Lena with a knowing smile. Well done, both of you, he said, pride shining in his voice. I've suspected Lucas for months, but needed the right moment to act. You could have told me, Callum said, not accusing, but with a rare softness in his tone. You let me believe I was alone in this. Harold gave him a quiet look. Would you have believed me if you hadn't seen it with your own eyes? He asked gently. Then with a twinkle in his gaze, he added, sometimes. The best things come from the most unexpected circumstances. That evening, Callum and Lena stood together on the penthouse terrace, the city stretching out below them in a sea of shimmering lights. The night was crisp, quiet. The whirlwind of the day had left them both drained, yet oddly light, as though something heavy had finally lifted. Your uncle knew, Lena murmured, staring out over the skyline. About Lucas and about us. He's always seen more than he lets on, Callum replied, handing her a glass of champagne. He orchestrated quite the finale. Speaking of performances, she said, carefully turning to face him, yours today was convincing. Callum's eyes met hers, open searching. It wasn't just a performance. Her breath caught. I'm saying, he continued stepping closer, that somewhere between that broken prototype and today's meeting, this stopped being about a contract. At least for me, he set his glass down and took both of her hands in his. The things I said today, I meant every word. You've changed me, Lena. She listened, heart pounding as his thumbs brushed gently over her knuckles. I know what our contract says, 1 year, no emotions, a clean break, and if that's still what you want, I'll respect it. Lena looked at him, this complicated, guarded, brilliant man who had unexpectedly become a part of her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. What if she said, softly, I want to renegotiate? Hope flickered in his eyes. What terms did you have in mind? She stepped closer. Indefinite duration, she said, a smile ghosting her lips. Full partnership in everything, business and life. And mandatory dinner conversations. 4 nights a week, minimum. He smiled, that rare real one she'd grown to love. Those are steep demands, Miss Hart. And one more condition, she whispered that this time. When you kiss me, it's not for show. Callum's hand rose to her cheek. I believe I can agree to those terms, he murmured. And then he kissed her. There were no cameras, no scripts, no audience, just the truth, finally spoken through lips that no longer needed rehearsals. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice low and full of wonder. You know we still have a wedding in 3 days, Lena laughed. Good thing I already have the dress, and I have the ring, he said, lifting her hand and kissing the diamond, now glowing with new meaning, but I think, he added slowly, sinking to one knee, I'd like to propose properly this time. Gone was the commanding CEO. In his place stood a man, vulnerable, grounded in love. Lena Hart, he said, steady and certain. Will you marry me? Not for a contract, not for the company, just for us. Her answer needed no rehearsal. Yes, because some contracts aren't made in boardrooms. They're made in the spaces between laughter and late-night conversations, between glances that last too long and touches that say everything. Some contracts are meant to last a lifetime. 1 year later, Wexler Innovations celebrated the global launch of its revolutionary clean energy device, the same technology that had once shattered at Lena's feet. And now she stood beside Callum, not as an intern, not as a fiancé, but as his partner, in every sense of the word. As they looked out over the crowd, his hand found hers, quiet, certain, from broken prototypes to rebuilt hearts. Their journey had been anything but traditional, but it had been real. And in the end, that was all that ever mattered. The prototype, Lena had once shattered, now stood proudly on the world stage, reimagined, rebuilt, and ready to change the future of clean energy. And this time she wasn't an intern in the shadows. She was the head of Wexler Innovations R&D department, standing side by side with her husband, her partner in every sense, as they introduced their breakthrough to the world. Lucas Wexler, once a threat, lurking in polished suits and whispered sabotage, was now serving time for his betrayal. Meanwhile, Harold Wexler had embraced a peaceful retirement, occasionally dropping by the company or their home to dote on the grandniece or grandnephew he insisted would be arriving. Any day, now Rose Hart, with her ever-watchful eyes and soft, firm wisdom, had moved into the guest house on Callum and Lena's new property. Her garden had grown beautifully vibrant and full of life. Among the blooms was a new rose, deep red, with edges tinged in silver. They called it the Wexler Red, a tribute to new beginnings, born from broken roots, and in Callum's study, tucked between architectural sketches and shelves, lined with vintage film reels. One frame stood quietly on display, The original marriage contract, its pages now yellowed at the corners, a relic of a story that had never followed the rules. Not a symbol of transaction, but a reminder that the most meaningful partnerships are not defined by clauses or signatures, but by something far simpler and far stronger, two hearts choosing each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. Because sometimes, the most unexpected stories are the ones that heal us the most. Thank you for listening. To each of you who stayed with us until the very last chapter, thank you. Thank you for opening your heart to this story, for allowing Lena and Callum's journey to become a quiet part of your own. In a world that moves too fast, stories like these remind us to pause, to breathe, and to believe in second chances, in quiet courage, and in love that grows not from perfection, but from presence. We hope that somewhere, between the broken beginnings and the quiet healing, you found a little piece of yourself in this tale. And perhaps a little hope, too. From all of us at Shining Stories, thank you for being here. You are always welcome in our stories and in the space we hold for hearts like yours. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and stay inspired.